Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the podcast where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, you have a special guest. We're joined by my friend, Matt Burns, who's also, you guys probably know by now, is a previous guest on the show. Matt's actually now coming on the show to share give us an update on what he's currently doing. He's now the founder of the Global HR Collective. Matt, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Chris. Yourself?
Yeah, I think we're sick of each other by now.
I'm like furniture in that office, I think.
Matt, give our listeners an update. First, you're the first repeat guest on the show, so big moment.
I'm honored to be the first repeat on the show. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an amazing ride. So as we know, in October, I announced the launch of the Global HR Collective. And our goal was pretty clear. We're going to raise $1 million for charity in the first 5 years to support causes related to mental health advocacy and women entrepreneurs. I've spent the last 120 days just traveling the world, frankly, Chris, and talking to a lot of people and getting a lot of information and just trying to figure out where the next kind of 4+ years are going to lead us as we try to achieve that goal.
Just for everyone listening, because there's so many of the HR leaders that I speak to that are always thinking about leaving their business, following their passion outside or creating their own business or social entrepreneur enterprise like yourself. What led to this decision? What was that final moment where you're like, I'm going to do it? What did that conversation in your head look like?
Yeah, it was a conversation that frankly started for like 20 years ago, to be honest.
Yeah.
Most of my family are entrepreneurs. I was the odd one in that I pursued a corporate career and went through a lot of Fortune 100 companies. I think for me, Chris, it was a culmination of a few factors. The first one was I was in a role that was pretty unique in a corporate setting in that I had been part of the design and execution of a number of large restructuring activities. So when I say that, that means a lot of job loss, sometimes in the thousands of people. And I was architecting those solutions in a number of companies. And I was asking myself, did I want to spend the next 20 years of my career being that person, being the person who is kind of behind the controls and architecting job loss at scale? To be honest, the activities themselves were interesting in that they were very complex. They were very high pressure. And the first couple of them for me it was a really interesting challenge that I wanted to wrap my arms around. And I always blended trying to execute the activity, but trying to introduce some humanity in them. But ultimately, I felt that we really weren't moving the needle as far as systemic change in those organizations. We were just rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic, if you will. We weren't really making fundamental change. And while I can wrap my head around the idea of restructuring to make a business healthier or to pursue another business opportunity, I didn't feel like we were doing that. So that was one factor. The second factor is that from my own perspective, I achieved professional success at a pretty young age. I was very lucky that I had mentors early in my career that saw something special in me and gave me their time and their attention and their care. So I was a Fortune 500 executive at 31. So by all measures, I had, kind of reached the top of the mountain, if you will. And spoiler alert, there isn't a top of the mountain. There's just more mountain.
Yep.
And when you get to that proverbial top, the path to get there and what you have to sacrifice as a professional to achieve that kind of success, it comes at the expense of other things. So, if you had asked me at a dinner party how I was actually doing as a person, so how was Matt? The answer would be very different, but most people ask me how my job was. My job was great. I was getting big paychecks and I had all the fancy material things that we all aspire to get. But if you ask me how my relationships were with my family, with my significant others, with myself, with my health, they were terrible. And I was on a path to burnout. I actually got there a couple of times. And I know I have mentors who are in, 10, 15 years my senior, and they have stories that are littered with examples of heart attacks, broken marriages, kids that don't talk to them, failing health. And I just didn't want to go that path. And I realized that for me, that wasn't a path to success. And then the last piece, which I announced when I actually launched the collective, Chris, was I had an experience through an MBA program where I was exposed to an opportunity in Brazil where I met with a number of students that were kind of 16, 17 years old that were pursuing their post-secondary education. And those individuals themselves, they were sacrificing so much just to have an opportunity to go to university and to pursue their professional careers. And Brazil's education system is set up in such a way that if you don't have money, your kids can't go to private high school. And in that educational system, when you don't go to private high school, the chances that you get to university are very, very slim. these individuals were smart but underprivileged and were working really, really hard just to have a chance to go to university, just to have a chance to get a job so they could help their families come out of poverty. And as I sat there and heard their stories, to me, it cut right here because I heard a bit of myself in their stories. One thing I shared recently on LinkedIn was that coming out of high school, I was in an academically enriched program, and I had to forego university scholarships because my family needed me to help support financially in the short term. So I could hear that struggle that they had in terms of having to choose between helping the family financially, going to school. It came to me kind of all in a flood of emotions at once, and I realized just how selfish I really was. Here I was sitting in Sao Paulo. I've paid for my MBA with cash. I don't have any student loans. I'm going to Argentina the next week because I'm too stressed out and tired from my program. And here are these 17-year-old kids working their tails off just to have a chance for the success that I was given. And then I also was able to connect with them on an emotional level, in that I could hear the internal struggle that they were facing, having to choose between family and career and their personal interest and their family's interest. And I realized, Chris, in that moment that I had spent 20 years of my career justifying my behavior in a very selfish context because I was trying to recoup what I thought had been taken from me coming out of high school. And I realized that I'd cashed that check 10 times over, and it was time for me to give something back and to use the skills that I had built over 20 years in the corporate world to really give that back to society. I'm not motivated by money. I'm not motivated by title. What I'm motivated by is helping people and solving problems. And now I get to do that full time with the Global HR Collective.
Amazing. Well, thanks for catching us up, man. It's been amazing for me to get to know you personally and also to follow you on the journey, right? Since we first spoke a year and a half ago to where we are now. It's crazy. If I would have told you you would be where you are right now a year and a half ago when we spoke, you'd have said I'm crazy, right?
No, when we started talking, my plan was to be a Fortune 500 CEO. That was the goal.
I remember.
I was doing the MBA, get the international experience.
For that reason.
Yeah, go to London, go to New York, go to Tokyo, go to Beijing, take a real big executive role and really check that box with the MBA and do that corporate ladder climb. And I just realized that for me doesn't make any sense anymore. I think the traditional business models, the old patriarchal top-down
climb the ladder. Yeah,
they don't work. And most organizations are going through massive transformation right now because they're trying to adapt to an economy that is much more agile, much more nimble. You just simply can't survive in a top-down structure. And for me, I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I've devoted the first half of my career to helping those organizations have success, and I want to donate the next half of my career to helping broader society have success.
It's funny how we're all in it, and then when you finally reach, I can share a lot with what you just said, and I sacrificed my education to just make money because I didn't have a lot of money growing up. I'm a single parent. My mom raised us 4 kids on her own, so my only goal early on was just to get money, to make money, get a job. I had first job at 15 years old just to help myself and my mom and everyone, my brothers and sisters as well. So we always had jobs, and it's funny when I went into the corporate world, and I was so determined to be the best manager, then the best sales director, and then the best group sales director. Every time I got to one of those positions, I realized that all of that work I'd done to get there, it wore off. So everyone else around me was like, wow, Chris, you're doing so well. You got, you're a sales director, you're earning great money. And I was miserable. And I thought, oh, maybe if I go from 50,000 a year to 100,000, maybe that will make me happy. Then I got to making 100K a year, still not happy. And people don't realize that when you finally get to those roles, like it's not what you think. And a lot of times I pray for the days when I didn't have those responsibilities, where I could just be a sales guy and not be a sales manager and just have the responsibility of Chris. Because as soon as you have responsibility for a whole team and their livelihoods and you're responsible for their performance and you're measured that way, then it's a whole new world. Same reason I quit to start this company, Matt. Same as you. I realized that I wasn't going to be happy in that type of environment. And I wanted to do more. So which is why I started my own company. Yeah.
I mean, just for me personally, when you're in an HR role, and I think our audience can relate to this, when you're in an HR capacity, you're constantly involved in conversations at a senior level around the values of the organization. And as you've heard kind of through my story over the last 18 months, you know that my values have dramatically shifted, both personally and professionally. And I found myself in a situation where seemingly every day or every other day, my values were conflicting in a corporate context with what I thought was appropriate and what the corporate world was doing. And that's not a negative comment about the corporate world and the companies I've worked with. I've worked with really great, smart people. It's a function of when you're in a senior HR capacity, you can't turn that off. That problem is with you all the time. You're being faced with having to make strategic decisions around the people in the organization. And if you don't have a values alignment with the way that business is being conducted, that's a really tough place to be. And I ultimately wanted to make sure that my values aligned to the kind of work that I was doing. And that's why, like yourself, I chose to kind of create my own destiny and choose the Global HR Collective.
I said beforehand, there's so many people I speak to all the time, senior HR executives, that always tell me, Chris, I love to make the leap, start my own company, start my own consultancy, but they're just too scared to make that leap. And or not say scared, and I understand how they feel, by the way. It took me years to build courage before I was brave enough to go out on my own and do that. So I understand, guys. I understand. Trust me. I know you're still early on in the transition, right? But now you've made that leap. Looking back, what would you have said to Matt to make sure that he doesn't wait this long to go out and do it?
Yeah, see, I try really hard not to beat myself up about it, Chris. It took me 20 years to come to this realization. And if you'd asked people around me, I had people tell me for 20 years, Matt, why aren't you an entrepreneur? Why aren't you a consultant? Why aren't you doing your own thing? You seemingly have all the tools to be able to have success in that market. And as I got research and started to talk to other entrepreneurs who had made the leap, I was trying to figure out what were the skill sets that would make it necessary, and what were the skill sets that I needed to be able to have success in this job, in this role, in this new way of thinking. And for me, it was all about the internal barrier that I created in my head. To your point, it's the fear. Am I going to have success? I'm successful in what I'm doing right now. I'm not happy, but I'm successful. So do I want to leave that behind to take a big risk on myself? And as you've mentioned, family and friends and people surrounding you, there's an element of you should be thankful. I mean, Chris, I was in my 30s making an incredibly great salary. Again, externally, I had the perfect life, but people weren't able to, because I didn't let them in, weren't able to see the toll it took on me to get to that point. I had the kind of roles where people would, my parents would brag about the jobs that I had at dinner parties. And, it was easy for me to hand out business cards at, mixers and at friends' social events. And when you make the leap into entrepreneurial world, you start from scratch. It was a big transition for me in the first couple of weeks when I realized that I was no longer an executive and I was an entrepreneur. And I've learned some really interesting lessons over the first 4 months about the transition from one to the other. And Chris, I spent 20 years thinking about this, and I spent probably 18 months researching and talking to people. And I was still surprised by some things that I'd learned. One example would be is when you are an executive, your schedule, it looks very different than an entrepreneur. So for those who haven't been in an executive role, let me tell you what a schedule looks like for me kind of pre-transition. I would spend between 8 and 10 hours every single day in meetings, back-to-back meetings. One meeting after another, half an hour, 15 minutes, 1 hour. I would go to meetings, either they're one-to-ones with my team, I'm answering questions, I'm removing roadblocks, I'm helping support them with challenges that they're having, and I'm facilitating their work so that they can be able to have success in achieving their mandates. Or I'm intaking issues from my executive team or the organization. I'm listening to some of the challenges and pain points in the company, and then I'm rallying resources to solve for some of those gaps. Sometimes they're long-term plans, like they're predictable activities, and sometimes, especially in retail, it's we have an issue, we need to solve it right now. So a lot of my job was really around intaking problems, rallying resources, and providing tools and resources to be able to solve those problems. Well, as an entrepreneur, my first couple of months, I actually tried to replicate that schedule. So I booked meetings all day long, 5-6 days a week, and I was doing 50, 75 meetings a week as an entrepreneur. But then on the other end of that meeting, I didn't have a team of 30 people to pass the work to. I didn't have the resources to satisfy the problems that I was coming up against. And I'm sure for the other people in those conversations in the first 4 months, they must have thought like, who is this guy? And why is he so disorganized? And why is he getting back to my emails? And why is his response times not where it needs to be? And frankly, it was a function of, I was trying to take what had worked for me in the corporate world and bring it over to the entrepreneurial world. And I was failing miserably in doing so. So I've learned that actually for me, less is more. And the word that I've kind of created in my head for 2019 is I want to be more deliberate. I want to make sure that maybe I don't do 50 meetings a week. Maybe I do 10. But those are going to be the 10 best meetings I have. And I'm going to prep for the meeting. I'm going to come out of the meeting with some conversations and do the work and move relationships forward, because kind of as boiling it down to one sentence, Chris, the difference between activity and productivity, very different. Activity, really, 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 really busy and accomplish nothing.
Yep.
So when you're in a corporate world, all of the best things about you are kind of muted. And
at this stage of your business is not even needed.
No, not at all. I run a business, Chris, with 3 people right now, and 2 of them are part-time. So I work with freelancers around the world.
Meetings need to be short and sharp and then back to execution.
Get the work done. And here's what it is. As an entrepreneur, all the best things about me as a professional are highlighted. So the things that I'm really good at have much more of a spotlight to have success. But inversely, the things that I'm not good at, the things that in a corporate world didn't really have consequences, are showing up now as an entrepreneur. And I'm having to solve those problems. Otherwise, my business is going to start to fail. So I've heard time and time again that new businesses, startups take on the personality of their founders. Well, I can tell you, as a matter of fact, it's exactly what happens. And that for me was a real big lesson, because all of the opportunities that I was able to paper over in the corporate world, getting my paycheck every 2 weeks, well, there's a direct financial consequence now of those gaps as an entrepreneur. It actually affects the income that I make. It affects the businesses that I work on, the deals that I get. So having to face the fact that I was an imperfect executive and had to learn some things has been a really interesting journey over the first 120 days. The
advice I give to everyone is I did a year of planning before I quit my job. I built our website in the background whilst I was still in that role. I done all the things, but in the first 2 or 3 weeks is when I learned the most in the doing phase. And then all of a sudden your strategy and your, by the end of that month will look dramatically different to how you planned it. And it will never, ever go exactly to plan how you planned it out. You'll be pivoting multiple times throughout. And as you said, you have to prioritize only value add tasks, because you try, and that's what I did. Like, there was too many opportunities available to me. And then that was actually my problem. It sounds crazy. That was the problem, because I was focusing on too many things and doing an okay job across many things, as opposed to an amazing job at just a few things. And then that's kind of where we chose to spend our time, energy, resources. So I'm interested to know as well, from your perspective, what skills that were transferable that are now helping you as an entrepreneur, and then what skills you had to pick up that you didn't have before now as an entrepreneur that are necessary to be an entrepreneur. Let's start with the skills you had to pick up that are brand new, that you had to learn in order to go out on your own from, a global CHRO to entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I knew this going into it, but it's still been a real challenge. As an HR professional, you don't have to sell. So the work comes to me. I mean, HR is more often than not a defensive function in organizations. I wait for the issues to emerge, and then I solve the problem. So I'm doing mediation, I'm doing negotiation, I'm collaborating, but actually having to sell something is very different than a negotiation in that particular context where you're mediating a dispute. So I've had to learn how to close deals and sell both myself and the concepts in a real meaningful way. That's been a big transition, and I reached out to people along the way, and I've been learning things. And for me, I'm like you, Chris, I'm an experiential learner. So for me, it's about repetitions. I just go through
find out.
Just find out. And what transferred over in a positive way is, 20 years in HR. HR is an interesting function in that you have a lot of accountability, and yet you have no authority. So I never had the proverbial big stick in any organization. I couldn't walk around and say, "Thou shalt do this." So HR is about that negotiation and leveraging your emotional intelligence to move a mandate forward through influence. So the great thing is that as I'm making mistakes in real time, I can make adjustments in real time because I'm listening and I'm observing the interaction both ways, and I'm able to adjust on the fly. But after I finish those meetings, I'm doing a debrief going, okay, I made a misstep there. I don't want to make that mistake again. I have to learn from that experience. So I think that the emotional intelligence piece has really helped. but there's still, I don't know what I don't know. And it's funny, I spent 20 years in the corporate world, Chris, and now I'm a quote unquote consultant. How people treat me now is so much different than before.
I was going to get to that. You no longer have the big brand behind you, the big job title. And a lot of people I speak to really struggle because they know, I'm formerly the CHRO of a huge global conglomerate, right? And now all of a sudden, I'm not saying you're nobody, but all of a sudden now you're a consultant. You're now in this pool of tens of thousands of other consultants. How do you stand out?
And no one likes to be sold to, right? So no one likes to feel like they're being sold to because no one wants to be taken advantage of. So my approach is not a direct sales approach. I really try and build relationships and try and solve problems. And I rely heavily on my experience as a CHRO to be able to do that. But I know that, the same people that I would have had meetings with 6 months ago and now, they show up differently to the meeting. They almost have like their notepads and they're ready for almost like an adversarial conversation. And I work really hard to create a tone in the conversation that says, I'm not here to sell you. I'm here to listen to your problems. And then I'm here to try and present what I think is a good solution so that you can solve the problems for yourself and I'll facilitate that for you. But ultimately, that's the plan.
But Matt, you just described exactly what most HR leaders do in a day-to-day job. But that's where I see the transferability over is exactly what you just said. You're there to listen, understand the needs of that individual in the company context. That's the employee and what their needs are personally, or it's a development or something personal. And then you come with a solution and help them along that journey. That's exactly what you're doing with your customers. And I think many people overthink it and they overcomplicate it. And once you jump in, you'll realize that is really very transferable. I think HR leaders can become very successful in terms of selling themselves and their product and their brand if they follow that same process they normally do with their employees internally. And then secondly, you just said it earlier, which goes for you in general. I've known you for quite some time now. You're very self-aware. The ability for you to step back and look at Matt and assess, here's where I can improve, this is what I can do differently. That in itself is a huge strength that you have, and something that I feel that I'm developing, actually, the ability to sort of take a step back and say, is what I'm doing right now getting me closer to my goals and objectives? If not, stop doing it, Chris, and focus on what is. Because sometimes as an entrepreneur, you can get really carried away with a million different things that aren't adding value and generating revenue. And all of a sudden, it'll creep up very quickly and you realize, wait a minute, I've just burned through all of my cash.
Lucky in that when I have an ability to convey ideas in a really compelling way. I've always had that ability. And what I have to be mindful of is that ability in the context of ego. And I've had to learn to be a lot more vulnerable in this process, because unlike in a corporate setting where confidence is rewarded, I mean, in a boardroom in a Fortune 100 company, if people smell weakness, you don't go very far. People are looking for that, and they're looking to unravel your ideas because there's politics and there's all sorts of behind the scenes activities. So showing up to a meeting or a conversation or a pitch like I normally do was seen as a real positive in the corporate setting. And I worked for mostly American companies where those behaviors were valued and rewarded. But now as I'm going into the consulting world, I can't show up in a way that says Matt has a massive ego and he knows all the solutions to all the problems, because that puts people off. And so I've had to get a lot better about listening in the context of, disclosing what I'm good at, but also at the same time what I don't know. And that's been a really interesting and humbling lesson for me in this process is, you're right. I am pretty self-reflective, and I am my harshest critic, but I generally put forward an image that is quite, Teflon, like that I know things. And that's just because I was raised in the environment where that was what was valued.
It's not normal to, through this podcast, I've been very vulnerable. A lot of people that I speak to now as customers, they listen to the show and it's like, Chris, we really kind of know who you are. So, and I realized that's actually a massive strength, because people are happy to commit to being, a customer of ours, because they know what they're buying into. They know my personal why, the why of our organization and what we stand for. And they know, like, and trust Chris because I've been vulnerable, because I'm willing to share, both my work, my downfalls, both at home with my recent video with my wife and at work, because we're all human after all. So it's actually a strength. And people don't realize that.
The question I get a lot is, what is the Global HR Collective doing? So like when Matt, we see your social media posts, we see you're traveling, we see you're talking about content, but what are you actually doing? Fair question. I'm helping organizations architect solutions with technology in the context. So in most organizations, they have technologies in HR that are either dated or non-existent, and I help them connect with solutions that help their HR strategies really transform so that they can create great cultures and reduce their overhead simultaneously. And I've had the experience in doing that by tendering multiple technologies and bringing them into companies and doing the implementation. And the unique value proposition that I have, Chris, is that I was a CHRO. So I understand that when you put in an applicant tracking system, that 15 other things need to be thought about, not just plugging the system in the wall and walking away. So I really act as that CHRO's wingman and help them through the transition kind of during the selection process of technology. What are all the processes and SOPs and programs they need to think about as they're adapting their technology, and how do they need to change the way that they operate as a senior HR leader with technology now as a foundational element of their strategy. And that is not a comfortable place for a lot of HR leaders who have been promoted.
It comes to you. It comes to you quite naturally. I don't mind saying that as well.
But it comes to me naturally because I made a deliberate effort in my last job, Chris, to pursue an opportunity that was going to need technology and data at the forefront of it. And I know that retail in some circles doesn't have the best perception, because there's a perception of it being kind of a blue collar trade. Here's what I'll tell you. In a retail HR context, the amount of transactions you have with an individual employee are often far greater because of the turnover in that industry, and the budgets are far less than in other industries. I don't have massive budgets.
Because of the margins.
Because of the margins. So I work for some companies that were very frugal, and I had to convert $1 million ideas into $100 realities, and that's where the creativity came in. I mean, I had a boss who consistently told me, because I would talk about budget and how I needed more resources, and he would give me this wry grin and say, Matt, constraints drive innovation. Come back when you have a solution.
It does though.
And I learned how to stretch a dollar. So it's funny, now that I'm in a consulting role, I hear that from my clients a lot, which is, Matt, we're working with you because we know that we can leverage the maximum amount of value with the minimum amount of investment, because you understand how to operate within tight constraints. And HR, that's reality. There's not an HR leader that I've met who says, I have too much money in my budget, I'm trying to give some of it away. Everyone is trying to stretch dollars.
Do more with less.
And more with less. And I've got really, really good at doing that. So for me, that's been a really interesting observation. That skill set and that ability to stretch that has been really, really key. And I've really just enjoyed the interaction with other senior HR leaders as they go through their own challenges. And because I've sat in their chairs, I can understand and empathize with their position and help them develop solutions that make sense going forward.
Well, on that point then, Matt, I know you have an exciting announcement for us.
I'm so fortunate, and I'm so lucky that what we put out in the world, people have really connected with on multiple levels. I mean, yes, they agree with what we're doing from an academic perspective, but it's also touched people emotionally. And I'm so blessed that I have a social media following and community that is so supportive of what we're trying to accomplish. And today I'm really happy to announce that my partner, Andy Swan, with the Human Workplace Academy, has committed to a $100,000 US donation to the Global HR Collective. Absolutely phenomenal. In exchange for that, I'm going to help him move some courses. He has some amazing learning and development courses for leaders around the world. And I'm going to help him, connect those solutions to people that are having some challenges with their organizations. And if we achieve certain targets, he's going to donate $100,000 out of his pocket to the Global HR Collective, which puts us on pace to be well over 10% of our target. And we're only 4 months into a 5-year journey. Just phenomenal.
Amazing. I think we have to up the target, Matt. Yeah, one step at a time, Chris. You're like one step at a time.
Can I get to the million first? I want to get to that million first. And that for me, it's the inertia, Chris. So I always knew that the first deal was going to be the toughest one to get, and then once you do the first one, it starts to spin out of there. So I'm just so thankful for Andy for taking a chance on the Global HR Collective. It's really hard to sell people on something that there is no proof of concept for. And, yes, I have background, and yes, I have experience as a corporate executive, but being a social entrepreneur is very new for me. And I'm learning tough lessons every single day. And I just want to thank Andy and his organization for seeing something in me and putting their commitment behind what we're trying to accomplish. And, for other organizations that are interested in bringing forward their solutions and having to connect them with an HR audience, I just would encourage you to reach out. Happy to support wherever I can.
Yeah. And on that point, then, how can our listeners support you and learn more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think goes without saying, Chris, I'm on LinkedIn a lot.
Really,
so
Matt? No, I didn't know
I have a small LinkedIn presence. I've been quiet the last little while. I took some time off for the holidays to reconnect with family and friends, which is something I've been probably 20 years in the making. But now I'm coming in 2019, back at it, lots of energy, lots of passion. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or at my email address, matt@theglobalhrcollective.org. We're going to have, one thing I would say, Chris, if I have a regret in the last 120 days, and I don't have many because I love learning and I love the iterative process of this, is that I probably haven't done a great enough job communicating with the community around what I have been doing and where we're at. I've been so busy running around, traveling around the world. I've been to Zurich, Chicago, New York, London twice, Seattle. I've been spending so much time on the road that I haven't had time to really update the community. So going in 2019, you're going to see so many more updates from me and what we're doing in the collective, and looking forward to sharing some other announcements in the very short future.
One more time for our listeners, remind them the purpose of the collective and why they should get involved.
Yeah, so just again, Chris, we're going to raise $1 million for charity in the first 5 years to support causes related to mental health advocacy and women entrepreneurs. 2 causes that for me are just so important on a personal level. And I'm so excited to be able to start that journey and put some money where I think it's going to go to good use. I get a lot of people, Chris, asking me, what's a social enterprise, Matt? Like, are you a charity? Are you a corporation? Here's the answer. I'm both. I'm not an institution in either way. I'm not a big, Fortune 100 company, and I'm not a large charitable organization. I get to kind of bounce back and forth in between and kind of redefine that on it as we go. I compete in the market with for-profit companies, and as I make money, I give it all away.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you're going to be sharing how you give it away and what it's going to be contributed towards along the journey with us through social media, through LinkedIn. I think that part is very powerful, and so we're looking forward to seeing the impact of that directly. I think that's free because you really want to connect people, hence the name of the business, the organization that you've created, right? The Global HR Connected.
There's a prevailing belief out there, Chris, that you have to choose between profit and purpose. I talk to my friends in the corporate world. They're like, Matt, are you a charity or are you a business? And I have to explain to them, there's a third option. You can be both. You can have a lot of commercial success and deliver a lot of good on this planet. And I think when we look back 5 years from now, what we're doing as far as the collective is not going to be an isolated example. There's going to be a lot of other companies that are coming up behind us that are doing the same thing, which is doing great work economically and commercially and delivering so much value back to society. We have a long way to go in a lot of different areas, and I want to use business as the vehicle to be able to move the agenda in a social and in a societal context.
So before we wrap up, Matt, for everyone listening, I think this has been a great conversation because it's touching 2 points. One, the incredible work that you're going to be doing over the next few years, and also 2, the option for HR leaders that are in roles that are thinking about following their own passions and their own journey similar to your own, which there's so many that I know are just on that edge. They just quite haven't taken that leap. What advice would you give to those people? I suppose that's really the main thing. What advice would you give those people? And then obviously the best way to get in contact with you, you're probably going to tell me LinkedIn, but if there's any other way, tell our listeners.
So a couple of things for me, Chris, that I would say. First off is the ultimate currency in the 21st century economy is your network. So any investment that you make in developing a network and community around you is going to be pay you back tenfold. And I was very deliberate about doing that last year and built an audience on LinkedIn that is great size. And I'm so
we both saw the value from that, right?
You got to have the network because you can leverage the network in so many areas for feedback, to hold you accountable, to help support what you're trying to accomplish, to help spread good messages. Having that network is just so critical. So I would say first and foremost is get past the idea that LinkedIn is, or any social media for that issue, is be comfortable in sharing yourself with the world. People want to know what's going on with you and what you're thinking. The reason my audience grew is not because I'm a genius. It's because I was sharing raw feedback about my experiences in a corporate setting in a time when nobody else was really doing it in a corporate HR capacity. There's lots of salespeople and academics and consultants sharing their feedback. But as a practitioner, I was able to bring a unique perspective to a conversation that really wasn't being had. That's first and foremost, build that network. Second thing is identify for yourself what you're really passionate about. So Chris, you know this as an entrepreneur. There are some days you roll out of bed and you're just like, I would rather put the covers over my face and go back to sleep because like the world can sometimes feel like it's heavy and that there's lots going on. But here's what I think about. I think about the $1 million and all the good that is going to do. And that motivates me to get out of bed because it's no longer about Matt. It's about other people. So that's the fuel that I have. And that's why I know we're going to be successful, because I'm never going to stop working to help other individuals.
There's no
But
end
if
goal,
I have,
really. Yeah.
there's no end goal. And here's the thing. I often ask myself, like, Matt, you just left the corporate world. Why didn't you take a year off and just take a break? Why did you have to jump out of the corporate role and then make this massive announcement and transform your life? For me, it's about accountability. I've said it publicly now. I don't have a choice, Chris. I have to achieve this. And with the help of the collective, we will achieve this. So for me, it's as much about accountability and setting this organization up for success. We've said it. Now we have to go and get this. And that really motivates me to have success. So I would say is aligning your passions to what's important to you, to the things that you work on, just ensures that you're going to sustain the momentum even in those tough times. And then the last thing I would say, Chris, is that you have to be really self-aware and have a network of tight friends and community around you that's going to hold you accountable, and you can reach out to when you're having those tough days and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can I have to ask you a question about the sales process? I want to talk to you about my social media strategy. Or I had this meeting with this client and it didn't go well. Can we just play it back and talk it through? And having that community of people that you can rely on for feedback and trust is so important. And I'll offer myself up. So, I was a CHRO. I spent 15 years in HR, 20 years in the corporate world. If anyone has any questions at all, reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a direct message. My account is configured in a way that it's free for any user to send me a message, or send me an email, matt@globalhrcollective.org.
Fantastic. Well, Matt, thanks again for joining us on the show and sharing your journey. It's been so excited to follow you to where you are now, and certainly exciting times ahead for you. So look forward to having you back on the show again towards the end of the year, see how far we've gone. Guys, please take Matt up on his offer. If you are thinking about, leaving and pursuing your own passion as a HR leader, setting up your own consultancy or social enterprise like Matt, drop a message to Matt or to myself. Happy to help, not only help, with any challenge you have, but also connect you with any of the leaders and companies you'd like to within our own network. We're here, we want to grow together. And that's exactly why Matt's on the show today. We connected on LinkedIn a year and a half ago. Since then, I've met Matt personally twice in London. He's come to multiple workshops with us. We're friends now, right, Matt? Committed to you. You can't say no now. We're on the podcast.
we are good friends, Chris. Our values are so aligned, and that's why I love being an entrepreneur. You can work with people whose values align, and I'm so blessed to have met you in this opportunity and this experience. If I hadn't taken that leap a year and a half ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
It's true. Well, guys, as always, head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find the show notes on the episode, everything we've been discussed. I'll link Matt's LinkedIn profile there and the Global HR Collective. Apart from that, Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us, and wish you all the best until next week.
And if you're an HR leader who's right now thinking about technology in the context of your strategy, reach out to me as well. Happy to help in that area. Technology, analytics, data, I'm all over that. So just send a note. Happy to help.
Matt is your man, guys. Make sure you make it happen.